Poštovani gledatelji, povjesničari i ljubitelji povijesti, dobar vam večer. Po završetku Prvog svjetskog rata, 1. rujna 1920. general Henri Gouraud proglasio je državu Veliki Libanon. Kršćanska zajednica Maronita, koja je bila najbrojnija, smatrala je da će biti u mogućnosti kontrolirati prostor koji je bio svega 100 kilometara širok i oko 200 kilometara dugačak. Na tome komadiću Bliskoga istoka živjelo je međutim niz različitih zajednica. Mnogi su već tada upozoravali da će megalomanija i nastojanje da se stvori kršćanska država na Bliskom istoku biti neuspjela. U svjetskom političkom žargonu pojmovi balkanizacija i libanonizacija mogu se smatrati sinonimima. O tome kako je nastala najmanja država na Bliskom istoku, kakvi su odnosi između pojedinih vjerskih zajednica u Libanonu i postoji li nada da će termin libanonizacija, balkanizacija postati prevladan kad je riječ o Bliskom istoku ili evropskom jugoistoku, govorimo u večerašnjoj trećoj povijesti.
Libanon, zemlja cedrova i domovina starih Feničana, danas je multikonfesionalna republika, čiji mozaik čini čak 18 različitih skupina, od kojih su 4 najvažnije: kršćanski maroniti, suniti, šiiti i druzi. Tijekom stoljeća pod osmanlijskom vlašću odnos maronita i druza imao je važnu ulogu, a od stjecanja nezavisnosti sve su 4 velike skupine podjednako bitne u političkoj slagalici. Okružen snažnim susjedima, Libanon je više puta u proteklih 100 godina poslužio kao poligon za mnoge sukobe. To je prokletstvo možda najbolje opisao libanonski pisac Charles Chavan, kada je 2006. nakon druge izraelske intervencije napisao da bi bilo najunosnije da Libanonci svoju zemlju iznajmljuju svima koji žele ratovati. Nekoć poznat po toleranciji, raznolikoj prirodi i predivnom glavnom gradu Bejrutu, koji nazivaju i Parizom Bliskog istoka, danas je Libanon ponajprije poznat po stravičnom građanskom ratu, upletanju Izraela i Sirije i jačanju radikalnih skupina poput Hezbolaha. S pravom možemo reći da je moderna povijest Libanona povijest Bliskog istoka u malome.
Gost večerašnje treće povijesti je Joseph Maila. I'm very pleased to have you with us here.
Thank you.
Profesor Maila predaje geopolitiku i medijaciju, inače politolog, prvi sekularni rektor Katoličkog sveučilišta u Parizu. Jedno vrijeme je radio u Ministarstvu vanjskih poslova u Francuskoj, bio je direktor odjela za planiranje politike. Inače je Libanonac, stručnjak za pitanja šita i sunita i međureligijski dijalog. U Hrvatskoj ovoga puta Joseph Maila boravi kao gost festivala francuske kulture Rendezvous. Mr. Maila, we are going to tackle the issue of Lebanon, something that's very close to your heart and something you understand very well. Lebanon is the smallest Middle Eastern country. Why is it so important? Are small countries in general a phenomenon of the modern civilization?
Yeah, thank you first of all for hosting me tonight. I would like to answer your question concerning Lebanon because it is a very genuine question which has its full place. Lebanon is a very small country, 10,000 square kilometers, of course, and this is very tiny for a country when you compare it to Egypt, to Syria, to Iraq, to Saudi Arabia, in the region. But at the same time, it has a very original history because it's encompassing almost 18 minorities that have come together. And they have, I must say, signed a kind of collective agreement distributing power among confessions and setting up a new form of democracy, which is not the Westminster democracy, which is not a one man, one vote, but rather it is what we call the consociative democracy, in which all the communities are represented in the parliament, in the army, at the university, so that you have everybody participating and having a share in the institutions of the country. So it has been given as a model of coexistence, of inter-religious dialogue. But at the same time, nobody can ignore that Lebanon has been going for a while through a tremendous and very tragic civil war. So the model has both faced. a phase of dialogue, and from time to time, when you don't come to terms, when you don't agree on the general orientations of your country, you can split and you can be divided, and that's what happened in 1975 when the Civil War broke out.
Mm-hmm. So, Professor Maila, do you think that it was, as some historians claim, a megalomaniac idea of the French to create a greater Lebanon as a Christian state in the Middle East?
Yeah, I don't share the idea that it was, of course, it was supported by the French at that time, because the French and the British were the victorious superpowers at that time, the power that have won the First World War, and they have come to face the Ottoman Empire in this region of the world, and then they distributed the whole provinces, eastern provinces of the Ottoman Empire. Between them, France was allowed or allocated, has been allocated the Syrian and the Lebanese region, and the Britons were in Palestine, in Iraq also, in Jordan. But the problem is not here. You have to go to a previous age, a previous area, in which you have a very strong Maronite Christian community being the original inhabitants of the Mount Lebanon. And this community were settled very long. It can go to the early 7th century after Christ, between the 6th and the 7th century after Christ, of course. And they've been settled there, and they're spread all over the Mount of Lebanon, going from the north, which is on the border of Syria, to the south, which is today the border of Israel. And after that, they went to the town, the main town of Lebanon being Beirut, and on the other side of Mount Lebanon, also in the Bekaa Valley. So they were not alone. I mean, in Lebanon, you have other Christian communities, the Orthodox one, which is directly come from the Byzantine Empire, was always been there, settling in Lebanon. And you have, of course, on the other hand, the Muslim communities. So the idea of having a country which will encompass or which bring together Christians and Muslims was, first of all, a fact of geography and a fact of history when it comes to the idea that the Christians were the most important group at that time in Mount Lebanon. Mm-hmm. Of course, the good relationship that exists between the French government and the French Republic and the French Empire in 1870, for example, has played very much in favor of creating something after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, in which Christianity or Christians in Lebanon would have an important role to play. But when Lebanon was created in 1920, by the French Henri Gouraud, at that time, Christians were amounting for 55% of the whole population. Mm. It means that 45% were Muslims. So it was not a Christian homeland. It was a Christian Muslim homeland.
Mm-hmm. When you say Christians, you don't have only the Maronites in mind. There are many other Christian religious groups.
Exactly. Yeah. There are many various factions, if you want, confessions within the Christianity. The most important was the Maronite. The other were the Greek Orthodox, the Greek Catholic, the Armenian. After that, they came after the Armenian genocide. Mm-hmm. In Lebanon.
Mm-hmm. So in Lebanon, by far, Maronites are the most numerous group, definitely among the Christians. Who are they? Where are they coming from? What was their language until 13th century, maybe after 13th century? How would you describe them?
Yeah. The Maronite was a very interesting group that was really created after a monk, which was a Syrian monk at that time, if you can consider that Syria is the name not of the state of Syria today, but of the whole region. We call it Syria at that time. It was within the Byzantine Empire. It was at the 5th century. There was a monk whose name was Maroon, or Maron. And after his name, the group that he has together with him was the Maronites. They were persecuted not by the Muslims, because the Muslims came 2 centuries after, but by the Christian empire, which was the Byzantine Empire. And you know that at that time there was big theological discussions among the divinity of Christ. Is he a man? Is he a God? Is he man and God at the same time? And for one reason, this group of the Maronite was considered by the Constantinople, which was the capital of the empire at that time, the Byzantine Empire, as being heterodox or an heretic. They don't share the, from the point of view of theology at that time, the dogma as it was just spelled out at that time by Constantinople. So they were compelled to flee. And they took refuge in the mountains of Lebanon, and there the community around the patriarch and around the monks, they flourished, if I might say, and they was very consistent. They have a lot of children. They become numerous. At that time, they used to speak Aramean, which is the language that the Christ was speaking in Palestine. And after that, Syriac. Syriac is the most important language was in this part of the world. It is the educated language of the people who spoke Aramean, which is the common language that everybody in the street at that time might speak. And after that, the beginning of the 15th, 16th century, the Maronite had the chance to be very much open to the West. So they sent their clerics to Rome. They were very much interested by all the ideas that were at that time, at the time of the Renaissance in Europe, flourishing everywhere. They have imported some of the most important ideas, and they took a very important decision. They were shifting progressively to Arabic. So they have come to Arabize the language, which was the language of all the surroundings. When they were in the mountains, there's no need to speak Arabic. But when you go to the coast and you have to do trade and to go overseas, and you have to speak another language. So they adopted the Arabic language, and they became part of the Arab world. Yeah. And this is the way this community, which is a very old one, has really been very much successful in adapting itself to the whole environment. Mm-hmm.
Some of the scholars or even Maronites claim that they do not belong to the Middle East, that they are more people of the Mediterranean, that they claim to be the descendants of Phoenicians. How do you comment on that?
This is a way of putting a very, stressing a very interesting point, which is the identity point. Since they were Christians, they want to make a differentiation between them and their counterpart Muslims. So there was this claim, which was partly mythology, partly ideology, saying, look, we are a little bit different since we are Christians. We are just the followers or the descendants of the Phoenicians. But the problem is that the Phoenicians were the inhabitants of the coast, and the Maronite were the inhabitants of the mountains. So it's difficult to accommodate this idea. But still, it's much more a way of differentiating yourself from your environment in order to foster or to bolster your identity and say, well, we are a very specific, genuine community which has features, anthropological, cultural features that we don't share with the rest of the country. And it is true partly because they didn't speak Arabic at the very beginning, but they are part of the word, this word, and they were much more and more involved in this word, and they become very famous, in the Arab world, traders going overseas, and being the go-between between the West and the East at one point. So you need to speak Arabic in order to be a go-between.
Christians in Lebanon are not alone there. They are surrounded by numerous Muslim groups. Maybe we could start with the smallest, with the Druze. Who are they?
You're right in pointing out the importance of the Druze. Why? Because the Maronite and the Druze at the very beginning was the genuine inhabitants of Mount Lebanon. There was no Sunni and no Shiite at one point, because they came after to the mountain. The mountain was the ground or the land of the Maronite and the Druzes. The Druzes are a very small community, which stem from the Islamic community, of course. It was also history of schismatic or heterodox community. They were born in Egypt. In the year 1996, Egypt were governed at that time by the Fatimid Empire. And the Fatimid was Ismailis. And Ismailis was a branch of the Shiite groups. Here again, there was a new religion that was created at that time, stating that the caliphate of the Fatimid at that time, which was the Al-Hakim, his name was Al-Hakim, has come to be a divinity for the followers of this man. So they were persecuted also, because in Islam you cannot have a man who can claim to have a divine status, and they were compelled to flee also, and they took refuge in the southern part of Mount Lebanon. So on the northern part, you had the Maronites starting from the year 600, 700, and at the year 1000, you would have also the Druze completing being parts of the mountain. So Maronites and Druzes were the two components of this Mount Lebanon, around which the greater Lebanon was created. You have to join the coast, and on the other side, the Bekaa Valley. And if you have the coast, the Bekaa Valley, and the mountain, you have what we call today the state of Lebanon.
So the Maronites and the Druze are the very heart of Lebanon. What were the relations between these two groups, the Druze and the Maronites?
They had very tense relations because they're very into it was, very good relation because they live in the same country, in the same mountain. They have relations for 400, 500 years. But a very important point to remind is that the Maronite were the poor of the mountain. They were the peasants. And the Druze have come to become the lords and the landlords. So the Maronite at one point were working on the land of the Druzes. And at the middle of the 19th century, 1840, there were very tense relations between poor peasants who came to revolt against the landlords, and the landlords were the Druzes. And starting from the middle of the 19th century, the poor would have the upper hand. And they were much more numerous than the Druze, and Mount Lebanon was governed by Druzes or emirs, which were the governors of the mountain, who were Druzes. But starting from the middle of the 19th century, the Maronites were mounting in power and having more and more influence, money, and they were the people at the beginning of the 20th century who were leading the mountain at that time, and that's why they have good relation of the French. One have also to have in mind a very important events that took place in 1840 and especially 1860. There was a communal strife. Maronites were massacred by the Druze. 25,000 Christians were killed in the mountains, in Damascus, also in Syria. And then France, which was governed by the empire, it was an empire at that time, Napoleon III, they came to the rescue of the Christians. And the relations were almost good at that time. They were better and better, if I might say. And when arrived the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the French were in a position to be very much in favor of the claimings of the Christians. And here I would like to say that the Christians never claimed to have, or the Maronite at that time, of course, never claimed to have a country for their own. It's not Israel. Israel, it's the land of the Jews or the Jewish people. But the Maronite, because of the coexistence in the mountain, never thought of having something which would be a country for the Christians or the country for the Maronites. From the very beginning, Lebanon has been created with the idea that this would be and will be a country in which all communities will live together. And the Maronite accepted this idea, and they were very zealous and militant, and they wanted to have, they were very active. They went to the Versailles Treaty, where the whole thing were decided, and say, look, we want to have a greater Lebanon in which we can live with the other communities that were almost present in this part of the Near East.
1860. Nakon desetljeća reformi unutar Osmanlijskog carstva i sve većeg utjecaja europskih sila na zbivanja na Levantu, dolazi do krvavog obračuna između Maronita i Druza. Maroniti, koji su najčešće bili u podređenom položaju, dižu ustanak tijekom kojeg su Druzi pobili 20.000 kršćana i uništili mnoge crkve. Zbog protesta i velikog pritiska europskih sila osnovan je libanonski mutesarifat, kojim je područje Libanona administrativno odvojeno od Sirije. Novo je uređenje jamčilo sigurnost Maronitima, a nominalno je regija bila pod upravom vijeća u kojem su bile zastupljene sve skupine u Libanonu. Od 1914. do 1918. Tijekom Prvog svjetskog rata na području Libanona više od polovice stanovništva umire od strašne gladi, za koju je djelomično bio odgovoran i turski general Džemal Paša. Tih godina na sjever zemlje dolazi velika skupina Armenaca koji su pobjegli pred genocidom. 1920. Na tragu sporazuma Sykes-Picot iz 1916. Francuska dobiva mandat Lige naroda nad Sirijom i Libanonom. U godinama francuske uprave taj je golemi teritorij podijeljen na nekoliko administrativnih jedinica, od kojih je jedna bila Veliki Libanon, koja je osim područja planine Libanon obuhvaćala i dolinu Beka na istoku, te Tripoli i Sidon na jugu. Tim je zahvatom uvelike promijenjen vjerski i etnički sastav Libanona, a posebno se povećao broj sunita i šiita. Ovo je prekrajanje karte imalo dugoročne posljedice na sva buduća zbivanja u toj državi. Prvi su svoje nezadovoljstvo iskazali Druzi, koji 1925. godine podižu ustanak, međutim ubrzo je ugušen. Već iduće godine, 1926. donesen je prvi ustav, koji je nominalno jamčio ravnopravnu zastupljenost svih skupina, ali je zapravo bio sastavljen kako bi zaštitio Maronite.
Druze are also a Shiite sect, we could say that. But the Shiites were prosecuted almost everywhere in the Middle East, including the Lebanon. Can you tell on that a little bit?
Well, it's a long story. And the story went to the early ages of Islam.
Yeah.
The first split, which led to the birth of the Shiite group, has taken place between 661 and 680. At that time, the community, which was Sunnite community, but nobody at that time thought about Sunnat and Shiite, it was a Muslim community, has split over one problem: who is going to succeed the Prophet? Will it be somebody who is elected, like the Sunni were thinking? I mean, elected at that time means that you have to have discussions among the elders of the community, the ulama of the community, and then they decide who will be the next Khalifa of the Muslim, which is the person who succeeds the Prophet. And there was another school of thought at that time who said, no, the leadership of the community has to remain within the family of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. So Fatima was his daughter. She married Ali, and some of the people at that time thought that you should have a descendancy that comes from Ali, which was the cousin of the Prophet, and who married the daughter of the Prophet. So the split was between, there was a civil war a fitna that they call in Islam, between 661 when Ali was assassinated and 680 when the second son of Ali was assassinated. And at that time, a party who claimed that Ali was, and his successor, his son, was the genuine one who should succeed the Prophet at that time, or the caliphates before him, split, and they were prosecuted, and they were vanquished by the Muslim Sunnite community. And starting from that time, people used to say there is the Sunnite and there is the Shiite. At that time, they were prosecuted, as you say. Most part of the Shiite went and took refuge in Iran, and that's why Iran is today 85% Shiite. They also were present in Iraq, and Iraq is 60% today Shiite. And the smaller part, which is an important part considering Lebanon, because Lebanon is already small, you have between 30 and 35% of the people of Lebanon who are Shiite. So Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Bahrain, 60%, Saudi Arabia, between 15 and 17% of the people of Saudi Arabia are Shiite. And of course, if you go to the great Middle East, if I might say, in Afghanistan you have 50%, in Pakistan, in India also you have Shiite people.
How can you distinguish between the Shiites and the Sunnis? How is it possible for someone coming from the West to see the difference?
Very difficult to distinguish. Yeah. But because on the mainstream theological stream, there is no difference. They have the same pilgrimage. The Quran, of course, is the same. The prayers are the same. So it was at the very beginning a political split, which turned to be a theological one, and not which is commonly admitted. It begins by being theology, and then it becomes politics. Here it has begun by being politics. It's a discussion over the succession of the Prophet. And after that, the differences come to be theological discussion. But the most important thing is that they don't have the same Sharia. They have a mazhab, which is a school of thought, juridical thought, which is different. Of course, from the creed, the Shiite creed believes also that after the death of Muhammad, the continuation of, not the prophecy, because the prophecy was closed, but the interpretation of the Quran and of the prophecy that was brought about by Muhammad, being given by God, of course, would be conferred to people who are dedicated to the understanding of Quran, which are the imams. So when you're talking about imams, you have to think about the Shia. So the 12th imam of the Shia, the 7th imam of the Shia. So they have this very specific organization of the clerics within the Shiite, which are the ayatollahs, for example, in Iran, who are the person granted or allowed to give an interpretation of the Quran. And this is the small difference. And of course, the Shiite, all the sects of the Shiite, they have one belief that can make the big difference between them and between the Sunnite, which is that the Shiite believe that the 12th Imam, which is the Mahdi, Imam al-Mahdi, or the 7th Imam for the Seveners, will come to earth someday, come back to earth, and this would signify the end of the world. So the Shiite is a kind of messianistic way of looking at Islam. Like the Jews, they believe that the Messiah has not come yet, and he is going to come, and after that we'll have the end of the world. When the Christians, for example, believed, or still believe, of course, that Christ was the Messiah, and it has already come. So they're waiting for for the Mahdi, for the Messiah to come and put an end to this world. And after that, it will be 1,000 years of peace on earth, and after that, the world will finish. This is the Shiite creed. A small difference, but an important one for the believers, of course.
The last group, the most numerous group of Muslims in Lebanon are the Sunnis. Who are they? Why are they in different or special position?
Yes, the majority, the immense majority of the Muslims in the world are Sunnite. If you have a look to the Islam today, which, I mean, the people, the believers, Muslim believers, must be 1.2 or 3 billion in the world. You have 100 million Shiite, 100 million, and the others are Sunnite. So the most important group in Islam is the Sunnite. And in Lebanon, they have come to there were, of course, it's the same religion that the empire, the Ottoman Empire. So they have a very particular status. When the empire, the Ottoman Empire was there, the Sunnite was the privileged group all over the world. I mean, in the Balkan, in North Africa, in the Middle East. This was the true, quote-unquote, religion and the true creed in Islam. And the Sultan, of course, was the defender of the faith. And he was defending Islam and the version, if I might say, of the Sunnite creed. He was the defender of the Sunnite creed. So the Sharia comes from here, and he was the Sultan, the empire, the caliphate of the Muslim empire. He was at the same time the head of the Islamic community and the head of the state, which was the Ottoman Empire at that time. So he was the defender of the faithful, of the believers in Islam.
1936. Potpisan je francusko-libanonski sporazum, kojim je Libanon teoretski dobio neovisnost, ali su Francuzi zadržali svoje snage u zemlji. Iste godine istaknuti maronitski političar Pierre Jamael, nakon posjeta Trećem rajhu, osnovao stranku Falanga, koja je imala važnu ulogu u idućih pola stoljeća. 1943. Nakon što su 1941. Britanci odlučnom akcijom preoteli Siriju i Libanon od francuske višijske vlade, vođa slobodne Francuske Charles de Gaulle u studenom 1943. dao je Libanonu punu nezavisnost. Političko uređenje se temeljilo na ustavu iz 1926. ali i na takozvanom nepisanom nacionalnom paktu, kojim je određeno da je predsjednik uvijek maronit, premijer sunit, predsjednik sabora šijit, a načelnik glavnog stožera iz redova druza. Osim toga, maroniti su se obvezali štititi multikonfesionalnost, a Arapi su morali odustati od panarapskih ideja. Takva podjela po ključu i strelovit ekonomski razvoj Bejruta omogućili su mladoj libanonskoj demokraciji da procvjeta u prvom desetljeću nakon Drugog svjetskog rata. 1958. Na vrhuncu hladnog rata, libanonski se predsjednik Kamil Šamun našao suočen s arapskim ustankom. Naime, porast panarabizma, a pogotovo spajanje Naserova Egipta i Sirije u Ujedinjenu Arapsku republiku početkom 1958. stavili su mladu libanonsku demokraciju pred veliku kušnju. Suniti sa sjevera Libanona priklonili su se Naseru i prijetio je građanski rat, a situacija se dodatno zaoštrila kada je u srpnju izbio puč u Iraku, te se činilo da je naserizam u nezaustavljivom naletu. Ipak, katastrofa je izbjegnuta. Američki predsjednik Dwight Eisenhower pod izlikom da postoji opasnost od širenja komunizma, takozvana Eisenhowerova doktrina, poslao je 14.000 američkih vojnika u Bejrut.
Some claim that Lebanon is part of greater Syria. What do we mean by that term? What is greater Syria?
Greater Syria has never existed. It was part of an ideology who said, after the fall of the empire, the Ottoman Empire, that all these countries that compose the Near East today, mainly Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria, should constitute a united republic, which is the Greater Syria. This was a party that, the National Syrian Party, this was its ideology, saying, why do you want to create small countries or countries like Syria, like Iraq? We used to be a unified country. No, it was never the case. Within the Ottoman Empire, you have provinces, you had administrative units. So I don't think that it has never existed. I mean, the idea of Greater Syria, it was part of the solution that was created and put forth by political party, which is the Greater Syria Party, who said we should constitute a united and unified area. At the same time, you have the Muslim Brotherhood, who said, okay, there's a fall of the Ottoman Empire. Why don't we constitute an ummah again? We should be part of the Islamic ummah. And there is a third trend at that time who said, look, we were part of the Ottoman Empire, but the Turks are Turks and the Arabs are Arabs. So we should be reunited around the idea that there is an ummah, a nation, which is the Arab nation. So Syrian nation, Arab nation, Ottoman was already, and the third idea was that you can constitute states. And the United Kingdom and France at that time, they have the upper hand at the Conference of Versailles and of Sèvres in 1920, and they have decided to go through states, and this was the decision. So today it is very much criticized and saying, well, look, Syria is a hectic country, Iraq is totally dismantled, you have problems in Lebanon, we didn't ever get to have a settlement or solving the Israeli-Palestinian question, so we have committed an injustice or an error at that time. We should have unified the whole country. But my guess is today that if this were to be the case, we should have witnessed today tensions and separatism all along this so-called or allegedly called unified area. So at that time, we have, or the political trends and political powers at the time have to create the Middle East, being the Middle East that we know today, that never exists, because the Middle East was part of the Ottoman Empire, and it was administrative units, never independent political units.
But some of the major ideologists of this view that states equal nations and were Maronites or were Christians from Lebanon.
Yes and no. The people who claim for this idea were obviously Christians, and of course, definitely there were Christians who were at the very idea of Lebanon as a country. But with that, I mean, as time goes by, you have the Sunnite joining the idea of having independent Lebanon in 1943. And now the Shiite has joined also the idea after the 1982 withdrawal of the war that they fought against Israel. They're being the nationalists, the Shia people, fighting the Israeli occupation of Lebanon. And I think that there is a common sense today that Lebanon is here in its boundaries to exist. This, of course, will not prevent you from having tension within the communities, but if you have to get rid with the idea of Lebanon, what is the alternative? And there is no alternative. Greater Syria, today, you want to be part of Syria, but Syria has blown up. I mean, it no longer exists. So everybody is sticking to the idea of Lebanon today, and the struggle is not over the boundaries. The struggle is over the power in Lebanon, who will rule the country and who will have what. And this is the main discussion. But I think that if you draw comparison with the Balkan area, you have the same problems, minorities, the languages. But although the language is the same in Lebanon, everybody speaks Arabic, and Arabic is the official language of the country.
1970. Nakon katastrofe koju su arapske države doživjele 1967. tijekom šestodnevnog rata s Izraelom, palestinska oslobodilačka organizacija PLO dolazi u Jordan. Radikalna politika PLO-a ubrzo je dovela do sukoba s jordanskim vlastima, te je u crnom rujnu 1970. PLO istjeran iz Jordana. Neposredno nakon toga PLO premješta sjedište u Bejrut i iz južnog Libanona pokreće terorističku kampanju protiv Izraela. Dolazak PLO-a Jasera Arafata dodatno je destabilizirao stanje u Libanonu, jer ta je organizacija zapravo bila država unutar države. 1975. Nakon što su falangisti napali snage PLO-a, u Bejrutu počinje krvavi građanski rat, koji je trajao 15 godina. Ulicama Bejruta ubrzo su zavladale suprotstavljene naoružane skupine. Posebno je bio mučan prosinac 1975. kada su falangisti podigli barikade u Bejrutu, te nakon pregleda osobnih iskaznica na kojima je pisalo religijsko opredjeljenje, na mjestu ubijali sve muslimane i Palestince. Iduće se godine sukob dodatno zahuktao, te su počinjeni stravični pokolji u Karantini i Damuru. U strahu od daljnjih zločina, predsjednik Sulejman Frandžija 1976. poziva sirijske snage da smire stanje u zemlji. 1982. Isprovocirani kampanjom PLO-a, a pod izlikom pokušaja atentata na veleposlanika u Londonu, Izraelci ulaze u Libanon. Prema planu izraelskog ministra obrane Ariela Šarona, Izraelci napadaju Sirijce u dolini Beka, opkoljavaju Bejrut i prisiljavaju PLO i sirijsku vojsku na povlačenje. Nakon što je PLO napustio Libanon, maronitski je fanatik ubio novoizabranog predsjednika Bašira Žemaela, smatrajući da je prodao zemlju Izraelcima. Svega nekoliko dana nakon toga ubojstva, falangisti su uz prešutnu suglasnost izraelskih snaga počinili strašan pokolj u palestinskim izbjegličkim logorima u južnom Bejrutu, Sabri i Šatili. Unatoč mnogobrojnim pokušajima međunarodnog posredovanja, idućih je godina Libanon ušao u nezaustavljivu spiralu nasilja i rata svih protiv svih. U sukob su se posredno uključili i Irak i Iran, a međunarodna je intervencija neslavno propala nakon samoubilačkih napada na američko veleposlanstvo i vojarnu mirovnih snaga 1983.
It's also important to explain the importance of the Palestinians and their influence on the policy and life in Lebanon.
You have to go back also to the beginning of the 20th century or the 19th century, what the idea of having a special state for the Jews was born at that time, and it was an idea of a man, Theodor Herzl, who wrote in 1896 a book, Der Judenstaat, and promoted the idea of having a Notstaat, a state which would be a refuge for the Jews that were prosecuted at that time in Poland and in the eastern part of western part of Russia. The idea has come to become a real idea, and it has been shaped as a country after the First World War. And the United Kingdom, who accepted the idea of having not a country but a homeland, that was the agreement that was given at that time by the British Empire. They said, well, we accept to have in Palestine a homeland for the Jewish people. So starting from 1920, Jews began to go to Israel, to emigrate to Israel, under the control of the United Kingdom and the British Empire at that time, who was the ruler, he has the mandate over Palestine. And the country, which is a part of, everybody speaks Arabic, it is Palestinians are an Arab people, has progressively, as time went by, become also populated Palestine by 600,000 people in 1948. And in front of this 600,000 people who were Jews, there were 1.5 million people who were Arabs. In 1948, you know that the war broke out. The Arab were compelled to flee from Israel. They constitute the Palestinian diaspora of today. The state of Israel was proclaimed by Ben Gurion, the 15th of May, 1948. And after that, it was a deadlock. I mean, there was a state of Israel, there was not a state of Palestine, and the Palestinian people were spread all over the Near East, and Lebanon and Syria, some in Egypt mostly, and Jordan. So we have to wait till the Oslo Agreement or the Camp David Agreement and the proclamation in 1993, not of the Palestinian state, but the beginning of the discussion between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, which is still the PLO, in order to have something, to have a settlement for the whole case. But unfortunately, discussions, agreements, transitory agreements, everything come to a fail and never succeed to have a beginning of something which is the peace process. We called it in the region the peace process. Everybody, professors, as I am, called it the peace process. But if you have to have a very accurate look on it, you won't find any peace. So everybody is waiting for the end of this conflict. It is the mother of all conflicts. Yes. We have to settle it. I mean, being the international community, the European community, or the states of the region, it's a compelling task for everybody to put an end to this crisis and to this awful war. It is a protracted conflict. It is enduring since 1948. It's maybe after the close of the Irish question, the most important question, that is the longest question pending and never being solved. And it is the beginning of all things, because you have this conflict taking roots in the Middle East and spreading all over. Lebanon, you can consider it as a political scientist or a historian as being something which has an extension of the Palestinian-Israeli crisis. Events in Jordan in 1970 also, but maybe the case of Syria with the Golan Heights being still occupied, and the Palestinian belonging to nobody, if I might say. No political body, refugees, diaspora, and people who were fighting just to have their rights, maybe the right of having a state, certainly the right to have a state, but also to be part of a political body for the moment being, which can lead eventually to the creation of a Palestinian state someday.
When I say Balkanization, what's your first association?
Well, I would say Lebanization, because I know that the word came first, Lebanization. Unfortunately, because Lebanon could be also very well known without referring to it being a Balkanized or Lebanese tribe. But starting from the war of 1975, there was a partition in the country. The partition never succeeded. And Lebanon today is a united country. But at that time, from the civil war began in 1975. And it lasted till 1990, at the end of 1990, with the Taif Agreement, which is equivalent to the Dayton Agreement, if you want, a new social agreement, a new national covenant between the communities. But between these 15 years of civil war, Lebanon was a collection of small groups controlling small parts of Lebanon, the Christians, the Druze, the Sunnite, the Shiite, and very well-known groups as the Kataib groups, the Lebanese Forces group, the Hezbollah group after that, which is the Shiite group, the Sunnis also, by each city they have their own group. So it was a total mosaic the map was completely, I mean, the way it used, when you have a look on the map of the former Yugoslavia and what it has become today, maybe you have similarities that you can draw from the Lebanese path. So, yes, Lebanization was a fact at one point. But the interesting fact in that is that Lebanization never succeeded, because at the end of the day, the country was again reunited and reunified, and not the way in the after the war, at the end of the war in 1995 in Yugoslavia, you have many entities, many republics that stem from the former, the ex-Yugoslavia. In Lebanon, no, it was not the case. There was Lebanization, and then there was and there is still a unified Lebanon. Although the tensions between the communities is still there, and are still there, and I don't think they're going to disappear. Yeah. But still, you have to cope with that and accept to live with the others. And this is the national covenant, the national pact that was reasserted. The first pact was in 1943, and Lebanon at that time became independent from the French. And the second pact was renewed in 1990, and the Lebanese, after fighting each other for 15 years, has decided, yes, we're not going to unify, to partition our country, we are going to reunify it. So yes, Lebanization, but it was part of the story, it's not the whole story.
1989. Potpisan je sporazum u Taifu, koji je označio početak kraja građanskog rata. Sporazum su potpisali preživjeli članovi saziva parlamenta iz 1972. a predviđao je kraj nasilja, razoružanje svih skupina, reintegraciju Južnog Libanona, koji je još bio pod izraelskom okupacijom, i rekonstruiranje političkog života, kako bi se institucije prilagodile demografskoj realnosti, odnosno kako bi muslimani dobili veći utjecaj. 1990. U listopadu sirijske zračne snage bombardiraju predsjedničku palaču i predsjednik Michel Aoun, koji je de facto bio vođa maronitskih snaga, bježi iz zemlje. Tim je činom konačno završen građanski rat, a Libanon je pokrenuo mukotrpan proces političkog i ekonomskog oporavka. Izraelske snage povukle su se 2000. a sirijske tek 2005. godine. Međutim, to nije bio kraj mukama za ovu malu zemlju. Nova izraelska intervencija dogodila se 2006. zbog sukoba s Hezbolahom, koji je, valja napomenuti, jedina skupina koja se nije razoružala nakon završetka građanskog rata, te je vrlo važan politički čimbenik u Libanonu i danas. Novi problemi za Libanon nastupili su nakon propasti arapskog proljeća i početka sukoba u Siriji, sukoba koji stalno prijeti svima u regiji, a posebno nestabilnom Libanonu.
You are professor of mediation. How do you see the Middle East from that point of view, through these glasses?
Well, we need very much mediation. We need mediation in order to put an end to the crisis in Syria, to the crisis in Iraq, maybe also to intermediate between the Lebanese, but I think that the Lebanese are able now to discuss, and they have discussion between themselves. But my speciality goes beyond the Middle East, because I'm very much interested by the conflicts in Africa. Look today what's happening in Mali, in Centrafrique, the Republic of Central Africa. You can go also, I mean, to Nigeria, hoping that the conflict will never extend over there, never spread, but still, who knows? But I think that mediation is the finest way of trying to solve a conflict. It is the very good practice, the very good idea, the very good alternative to going to use violence or to use force in order to make your point of view prevail. I mean, this is a modern way, but this is a rational way, and this is also a way they can preserve the chances of the future. Because if there is a party or in a conflict, or a part of the conflict, or a faction in the conflict, which prevail by arms someday, I mean, still the reconciliation will be very much difficult in the aftermath. So the two things important. First, mediation in order to prevent conflict, before before conflicts break out. And if, unfortunately, the conflict is already here, mediation in order to put an end to the conflict. And I think that when I witnessed the spreading of the idea of mediation, it's amazing. I mean, all the European or international organizations have a unit dedicated to mediation. I'm thinking about the United Nations New York, and the Charter, Chapter 6, for example, has a whole chapter about the alternative ways of solving conflicts, which is alternative to violence, of course. If you go to the European Unit, you have a unit dedicated within the European Union today in Brussels to mediation. If you go to the organization of the Latin American countries, of the American countries, you have also a mediation. And lately, 10 years ago, the organization of the African Unity has created also a mediation team. And everybody is speaking about mediation. Everybody is trying to mediate within the conflict, but unfortunately I have to tell you that it's very difficult to have a very successful mediation. We have witnessed that with the fail of the Lada Brahimi, who was mandated by the United Nations in Geneva lately to intermediate between the Syrian factions, and unfortunately it has failed. But hopefully that this would be renewed, and at the end of the day we'll have a successful mediation, especially in Syria.
You have mentioned the need to mediate in many countries, and all of those countries you mentioned were former colonies. Are these things connected, colonial past and the need to mediate?
Yes. When we talk about mediation, I'm talking about international mediation. I mean a third-party mediation who come from outside and try to mediate. I don't agree with the idea that all mediation has taken place only between countries that were or used to be colonized by the Western powers. Look, for example, today, the situation between Russia and Croatia. Think about the mediation that was a very successful one, who took place and was signed by the agreement, the Good Friday Agreement in 1999 between the Protestants and the Catholic in the northern part of Ireland. So I think that mediation can occur within various contexts and various places all over the world. Now it is true that most of the conflicts that are today prevailing and all over the world, most of them are taking place in Africa and some countries of Asia, in which there was, of course, the role of the Western European countries being countries that have colonized the region, have had an important role to play. Why is it so? It is so because we have pointed out the question, because the boundaries are not very well drawn, because the population have no time in order to be part of the country, and the idea of the citizenship is not deeply rooted. So it is challenged by so many identities, ethnical, religious, linguistic identities. It is partly because the state is too young in order to create links and bonds that can bring together people, not only by the sectarian, which is not sufficient, obviously, to create a national identity feeling in the country, but by creating an identity which is encompass all the minor identities, and create really the feeling of being part of belonging to a broader community, which is the national community. So conflicts are occurring in these areas because the state are still young, and because the national identity has been very long in order to take roots and to be really